Today's presentation is really about, and I developed it with this idea as we begin to think about, like, look, if we think about our schools and our communities and even ourselves, in the past 18 months, something happened and it kind of pulled all the puzzle pieces apart. Some that were fitting really good together, some that were barely in place, but it pulled it apart. And so right now, what we're embarking on is just how do we reclaim, a sense of being a part of a community, right? And even our students, how do we begin to reclaim belonging? One of the things that I even think about, I have a 16-year-old niece and she's getting ready to start back school. And she's just like, Auntie, am I gonna fit in? Auntie, am I gonna have the same friends that I had before? So this idea of, wait, my idea of where I belonged and how I belonged in the community is different. And so really, what things do we need to think about as we begin to come back together? And I think at the forefront of it is, if we can set up things in places where we say, having everyone feel a part of the community is one of the most important things we can do, because when people feel a part, not only do they invest in themselves, they invest in others. And so it's really important right now that we begin to actually feel like, nobody has to do this alone, that we create this idea of collective care. And so this is what this is calling for, collective care, that we don't just say, how can I take care of myself? But we also say, how can I take care of others? Right? And so let's shift from just being in a self-care mode to thinking about how can we get in collective care, and even get other people thinking about, wait, I just don't want to think about how I'm taking care of myself and how I'm keeping myself safe, but let me also value and think about how am I helping take care of the others within the community and keeping them safe. And so with that in mind, again, this is part of our Thriving Minds PD series that is focused on comprehensive school mental health. On the screen, you'll see my partners. This is our last presentation for the summer. We will be picking it back up in the fall, so please be on the lookout for that. Again, at the end of the presentation, you will get an email that will have a recording, and it will also provide you with a PDF of the slides. So this information will be shared. And also, if you have questions, feel free to respond to that email. It'll go to myself, it'll go to my partners. And so we'll really keep it moving. So one of the things we're going to do today is I'm just going to talk about context. We're going to talk about grief. We're going to talk about regulation. And then we're just going to talk about some ways in which to find calm. And what does that mean and how does that look? And so one of the things that I keep bringing up, and you'll probably see the slide over and over again if you come to something that I do, is look, these are the zones in which people are in right now. So thriving, I would say very few people are thriving. Right now we're in surviving, struggling, and crisis. And so what does that mean for where we are? And I think the thing that keeps coming up with me is that people aren't sleeping. Eating habits have drastically changed, right? How people cope. Some people know how to cope, some people aren't. And people are just tired. And I don't know if you walk into a room, and this time last year, you could feel the enthusiasm, the energy, school's about to start, people are excited. If you walk into the room now, you're like, okay, is anybody here with me? Is anybody here today? Is anybody present? Right? And so those are the things we're bumping up against, but it's because people have been in these states chronically. Some people have been in these states for longer than 18 or 19 months. And some people have just been sitting here for the past time. And they're like, I don't know how to refill my bucket. I don't know how to shift from one to the other. Because part of it is sitting with uncertainty. And so one of your jobs this year is to help people sit with that uncertainty, and for that uncertainty not to become restlessness, and to keep people struggling and surviving, to understand we can embrace uncertainty because we're doing it together, right? And also understanding sometimes the blank stares you get, the attitudes you might be getting from parents, it's not because of you. It's just where they are. And so it's really important to hold that too, that if I'm in struggling or crisis mode, I have no patience, I'm acting out, I'm yelling a little bit. And you could be giving all, you could be kind and compassionate and loving, but I'm just not there. And so I'm not going to get that back to you. You're going to get what I have. And so how do we not take that as a personal injury and give that back? Is the other thing that's really important in this moment. So one of the things that we talk about, and one of the things that we believe is like, look, when I did this presentation, I was like, look, we got all these pandemics happening. We have COVID-19, which continues to happen. It hasn't gone anywhere. Then we have racism. And I would say at this point, I'm saying any ism, because it feels like right now, every ism you can think of is coming to the surface. And it's causing tension within families, within communities, within environments. It's almost as if COVID-19 came along and most of the stuff that we tried to bury, and we buried it alive, is coming up out of the ground and gripping us in society. And so what that has done is like, we're in the midst of really experiencing the effects of what a slow and persistent trauma will bring. And so what does that do to us? What does that mean? And so this is taken from Dr. Bruce Perry's webinar, which you'll get a link to. And he says, you know what? I want to remind everyone that stress is not always bad. That when our body and our system feels stressed is not always bad. But you know what? The only times it's not bad is when it's predictable, it's moderate, and it's controllable. And from there, we can tolerate it, or what we can build resilience. Right? And if you think about this, think about being, if anybody's been a coach or you got a kid that's been an athlete, the one thing the coach does is they make sure you have never played this opponent before, but because of the preparation, because of what they've shown you go in, you're not stressed. You go in and be like, we got this. The team is going to go in. That's because they've taken it and made what you could have been really stressed about predictable, moderate, and controllable. The problem we have when we become sensitized and vulnerable to it is when it's unpredictable, it's extreme, and it's prolonged. And so this is why I'm saying, if we think about our isms, if we think about COVID-19, the past 18, 19 months have been unpredictable, extreme, and prolonged. And so right now, everyone is very sensitized to what's happening. And so that's making the stress become maladaptive. And so again, it's a slow moving trauma. And I just want to remind everybody, the reason I'm saying that is because the ways in which people have coped with stress before, most people say it's not working. You know, just having that one tube of ice cream when I'm feeling stressed and I've heard some news, you know, that used to be, I just needed one. Now you need a whole, I need a refrigerator, right? And so just the existing ways that you used to cope with it, people can't do it anymore. So the way, and so now they're like, I don't know how to cope with this. I have no resources to deal with this, right? I don't feel like I'm getting any reprieve from this. And the thing that is, if we acknowledge it, we don't know what the short or long-term implications will be for this, right? Our hope, you know, is that we'll build resilience and people will be less stressed. But what we're seeing right now is emergency rooms are more filled, especially for mental health reasons, and they're more filled with younger kids and younger generations. So we don't know what this is going to mean. We don't know what it's going to mean for income levels of people. We don't know what it's going to mean for housing. There's so much, like, we don't know what the outcomes or the effects of this is going to be. One thing nobody talks about, there's been so much loss. We don't know what that's going to look like on the other side. And so the thing that I want to remind is, like, a lot of us, if we acknowledge it at the core, the moments where people are just sitting there, you're like, I don't know why the tears are happening, but they're coming. It's grief. And right now, there are a lot of people that are like upset and they're grieving. I wanted the same routine and structure that I had before. I want it back. And so people are grieving the loss of normalcy and even predictability. Right? Like, I think a lot of people like, I want a day-to-day routine. I want to know that there is some certainty in my life. There's the grief of connection. You know, like, people say, like, I used to see my mama all the time. I might have seen her, you know, 3 times this year. Like the connections that have been important, large family gatherings. Even if we think about the kids in our school, the connections that they used to have from being a part of an organization or a group or extracurricular, like people are grieving that. And what we don't know is our connections allow us to have identity. And so if I'm losing connection and I'm grieving connection, some people are also grieving loss of identity. I had a teacher come to me and say, I was the teacher of the year, and now I'm the worst teacher ever. Because of what she felt like she didn't have the resources to do what was needed during I couldn't keep my kids engaged, I couldn't do this and virtual. So she literally was grieving the loss of what it meant to be an excellent teacher and what she said it meant to be a horrible teacher. And so people are grieving a lot of different things. And so one of the things that this poem does, if we took a time and we think about it, is it talks about, you know what? There are 4 doors of grief. And one of those doors of grief is when I am reminded of a piece of me that I never wanted to be reminded of. That somebody might have talked about, that it confirms an identity or a piece of me that I never wanted to remember. And it could be that insecurity, right? Like I never wanted to remember. I went to the doctor and the scale doctor's like, can you stop eating? No. Do you not know where we are? Do you not know what we're in? And so just being reminded of, wait, I thought I had gotten this under control, habits, and just reminded of pieces of ourselves and ways of being that we aren't exactly proud of, right? That we don't want the world to know. So one of the things in this reclaiming our community is we have to learn how to sit with other people's grief, whether they acknowledge it or not, right? And how to sit with their stress. In our roles, we have to, how do we sit with it? And even what do we do for ourselves, right? And so one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to put you into groups, and I want you all to think about, and I want you to talk about just what are 2 to 3 ways that you sit with stress and that you sit with grief, and how can you apply that to your students, your families, your teacher, your school staff, because it's really important. One of the things that we want to encourage is, communities become more connected when it's not just about getting together for celebrating. When you can see me in all my phases of life and hold all of me, I become more connected to you, and I really feel like you care. Right? Imagine how you as an adult have felt when you can share with someone the good, the bad, and the ugly, versus just being able to share with them the good. Because when you can only share the good, you put a barrier up and you don't tell them everything. And so it creates distance instead of creating closeness. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and place you all in groups. If it will let me in the breakout rooms. Here we go. And then we'll come back in about 3 to 4 minutes.
Courtney, do you mind putting the questions in the chat? Some folks have asked me to do that whenever we put them in breakout groups.
Okay, hold on.
you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. If anyone felt like there was something that was really important or a really great idea that you haven't thought about that, or anything you want to share from your group, if you could put that in the chat, if you could unmute and share it, would love to hear what are some things that you all do? How are you sitting with this? And so feel free to unmute and to share those. One of the things that we've done with younger kids, so some elementary students, is we've actually had them do a clock. And so build a clock, and then each quadrant of the clock, we've actually had them reflect back and say, give us something that excited you, give us something that made you feel sad, give us something that made you feel hopeful, and just allow them a moment to reflect back on the last year. And they felt like that was really beneficial. Like they really enjoyed it and sharing it and talking about it. So that's something that we've done as an activity. So I would love to hear some of the things that you all have done. Yes, naming naming your feelings and getting rid of one of the most Well, I call it one of the most deadly things, I think, is perfectionism, right? And the idea that we reward it and we expect it instead of expecting people to be on a spectrum, that you're not all good and you're not all bad. We exist in the shades of gray, and your shade of gray can look different from hour to hour. Right? I don't know about you all, but sometimes we can start the day and you're ready and you're energized, and something happens and you're like, okay, my best is going to look different this afternoon than it did this morning. And so, really helping kids understand that. They said deep breathing. One of the things that's important, and we'll get to it later in the presentation, is that kids will regulate to the breath of the adult in the room. And so, how you breathe is how your kids will breathe in your room. The other thing that's really important as we think about getting kids and teachers in the community to breathe is that there is a certain music can be played at a certain rate that it will regulate and calm your heart rate. And it doesn't necessarily have to be what you think of as meditation music and music with no words. It's the pace of the music, even if it has words. So one of the things that some people have done is they're like, wait, I'll play this as people are entering my room or as people are exiting, so that people's heart rates will regulate to the music and it will bring us into calm and peace. Yeah. And so the other thing is thinking about and getting people to think about, like, look, we recognize this, but what's next? What do we do to support staff and students with this, Sarah? That's one of the good things is, how do we begin to say, I understand you, I see you, I understand you've had trauma, but how do we begin to offer? The key thing is, how do we shift from not just being trauma informed, but healing centered? And so, Sarah, the question you're asking is, how do we begin to embrace a healing centered approach? And that healing centered approach means we begin to say, how can I help you? And so the question begins, what help do you need? So we begin to start offering, for those that may need processing space, here's a circle you can join, right? For those kids that may need just an activity, we say, okay, look, we're just gonna have a space that's like regulation. You can just come and you can regulate in here, or different things. So we begin to offer things instead of just saying, I'm recognizing or we're being trauma informed, say, look, we wanna shift and be healing centered. Healing centered can also include this idea of, you know what, within our school, how do we create a community of care? And what does that mean to create a community of care, right? And so saying, we don't want to just know, but we want to create a community of care. And does that mean we start by using different phrases, or we start by offering, you know, everyone leaves, we do a kudos jar and everyone drops something in that's how somebody's helped them, and we read it out loud for everybody to hear. How do we normalize care versus just normalizing we need to care? And so I think that's something that's important as we think about moving forward. One of the things that I also think as we begin to think about embracing this idea of healing-centered care is this idea, and you all will see it here, of within the Bruce Perry model, he says, you know what, when you're calm and you're alert, you have access to the upper part of your brain, which is represented by the neocortex. And that's where you have your reasoning, that's where you have your reflecting. So when you're calm and alert, you have more access to the upper part of your brain. When you're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, do you all see how little access you have to reasoning and reflecting? And so I just want you all to think about this in the context of, a lot of times we like to operate, and I know when my little niece, when she's upset, I'm like trying to reason with her and it goes out the window. She's not hearing me. She's storming off. She's hearing the door. And when I look at this diagram, I realize why it's happening. She can't reason with me because she's in fight, flight, and she has access to this much of her brain. And if we recognize that, then we recognize a healing centered or a care approach means I need to do more to help you regulate. Because if I do that, then I help you be able to reason and reflect. And so it's really important that we begin to do that and we think about that. And if not, when people have this much access to their upper parts of their brain, this is what we start seeing playing out within the classroom, within personal lives. We see aggression, we see high emotions. I don't know if you see where people are dreamy and disassociated, disengaged, low self-esteem. These are the things that we start seeing when people don't have access to that, right? And so one of the things that's important is that we don't think, you know what? When people have, this is what behaviors we're seeing, we don't say, I'm going to continue to expect you to reason and reflect. I'm going to continue to expect for you to do the same thing. And I think that's the thing. I'm just got a chance to look at the chat. And when I hear new normal, it freaks me out. And I want to tell you all why it freaks me out. Because we sit with so much uncertainty. And when you say a new normal, people feel like, okay, this is the thing that's going to be stable. And I'm like, no, we're going from next normal to next normal to next normal, so that people begin to expect change, right? How can we talk next normal, right? And when we think about that next normal, we need to embrace that it's an opportunity to rethink what grounds us. Because the problem is people think, oh, I can't. One of the things I will acknowledge is like, we working with the school district, someone's like, ain't nobody has time to teach regulation skills. What do you mean, Courtney? I don't have time. You want me to just take a week and just connect with kids and get them reorientated and grounded to be in the school? I'm like, yes, orientation is important. Orientate them, give them a moment to get oriented, to know their teachers, to realize what it means to sit and be attentive for a minute. Just what does it mean to be a student again? Because if you do that, they'll be regulated and you'll get further in the long run. But it becomes, if we just expect, go back, it's gonna go back, you're gonna do this, you're gonna have to do this, the rote memory, like you're gonna go back in and the routine's just gonna be the same, we're gonna miss out on the opportunity that we're getting a group of people that, again, as I said, anxiety, depression is through the roof. Not just for kids, but for adults too. And so how do we become attuned to that? And instead of saying going back, that we stay forward. The other thing, realizing in this moment that's really important as you're thinking about bringing your communities back together, is recognizing, even if I'm asking you to do the same thing that I asked you to do before, you have less resources to do it, so I'm asking you to do more. Right? You have less access because of what you've been through to do it. So I'm asking you to do more. You have less resources and I'm asking you to do more, even though in my mind, it feels like I'm asking you to do the same thing. You have less access to this part of your brain. So I'm not asking you to do the same thing. I'm actually asking you to do more. And so that's something to consider and something that we need to think about. And again, we really have to focus on regulation and connection if we want to get to the point that we're seeing everyone able to reason and reflect and to do it in a calm way. One of the things that Dr. Bruce Perry says, and I hold firm to, and I want everyone, if you don't remember anything else, a dysregulated adult will struggle to regulate a dysregulated child. So if the adult in the room is escalated, it's going to be really hard for them to de-escalate a child. And so as we're coming back, how do we make sure that the adults also feel a sense of calm and peace and safety, and not just focus on the kids? So I'm going to share with you some core concepts as we really begin to think about this and move forward with this information. So one of the things that I tell everyone, and I'm going to read it because it's one of the most important quotes that I can think of from Dr. Bruce Perry. He says, "Fire can warm or consume, water can quench or drown, wind can caress or cut, and so it is with human relationships. We can both create and destroy, nurture and terrorize, and traumatize and heal each other." How we act in our relationships dictates the way we go. whether it's healthy and adaptive or whether it's not. And so the big question is to say, how am I showing up? Am I showing up in a way that nurtures or terrorizes, that heals or trauma? And so who you are, your experiences matter because they predict how you're going to show up. And one of the most important things when we think about relationships is in neuroscience, they say, you know what? I can tell a kid that is doing well in school based on how many positive interactions they've had throughout their day. The more positive interactions a kid has, the more likely for them to develop into healthy ways. The less positive interactions, the more maladaptive behaviors they have. And so if we think about this from a way of saying, how can I create more positive interactions for a kid? Because the more positive interactions I create, the more they're going to get access to the upper part of their brain, the better they're going to regulate. And those interactions can come from anywhere. But one of the things we've seen is if you actually map out and look at the interactions of a kid in the foster care system and the interaction of a kid in a safe
recording
home,
of it and give it
you'll
to
notice that kid, just by virtue of being in that home, they have had 10 positive interactions before school even starts, where the kid in foster care may have had 2. And that really dictates how the day goes for them, how they see themselves, how they feel in the class, whether they're confident or energized. And so it's really important that we begin to focus on how can I make sure that these kids have positive interactions so that they can go about doing other things in their day. One of the things that's important when I say those positive interactions is we have to think about, you know what? I have to spend my time and energy on things I can influence and what I can control. Because if I think about the bigger picture, I'm going to get stuck, I'm going to freeze, I'm not going to move because it can be overwhelming. And so it's really important to think about, spend your time and your emotions on what you can control. And my mom always says, what you focus on grows. So if we focus on what we can't control, then the idea of things being out of control is going to continue to grow. If we focus on what we can, then our feelings of being empowered will grow. So encouraging everyone to do that. One of the things that we advocated for past school year was practicing self and collective care. You all have heard me talk about it. That's so important. Fostering connection. Create predictability where you can with ritual and routine. Model moderation. And I tell anybody, model moderation, shrink the change. And when I say this, I'll give you an example. Y'all are gonna hear me talk a lot because my doctor has said some things to me that wasn't nice. It's like, there was this man, I was listening to a podcast and his doctor told him he needed to lose weight, wanted him to lose 30 pounds in 3 months. He said, you can do it, 10 pounds a month. The guy said, after 3 months, nothing happened. So what he decided to do is he said, every time I go to the bathroom, I'm gonna do 5 push-ups. Every time I use the bathroom, I'm gonna do 5 push-ups. In a year, he changed his body. But he moderated the change and he made it something that he could stick with. And so the question is, how do we begin to moderate even what we expect of those coming into the building, that it's achievable and it feels doable? Because if we don't, they're gonna have the same reaction that we do to stuff that seems insurmountable. If kids, all they hear is, I have to overcome this learning gap, and what's placed in front of them is this learning gap. The moment that they're not able to achieve something, they're gonna stop moving completely. They're gonna get stuck. And so instead of talking about the learning gap, how about we talk about the gains? How about we change and use a strength-based approach? And the gain, it might be minimal, but we need to celebrate it until the larger gains can happen. And again, this idea of controllability, really getting people to focus on what they can control, even kids. I'm showing you this diagram that we found from a culture care team out in Oregon, because I want you all to think about the thing that's easy to do is to get caught up in a burnout cycle. And we'll see the things, the exhaustion, the work harder. One of the things I had a colleague when we were in school, and they'll be like, grind hard and grind pretty. Like, you want to make sure you're grinding, always grind, and be pretty while you're doing it. That leads to exhaustion, right? And so that didn't even, for the community that I was in, it didn't even bring value to doing some of the other things in the wellness culture, which is prioritizing rest and joy. You don't gotta grind all the time. Breathe, take a break, right? Extend yourself self-compassion. You don't have to get all of this done. You don't have to feel like a failure or an imposter if you don't get this done in a certain time frame. And so really being able to do that. One of the things as you all think about bringing in healing into your environment is saying, how do we get people to embrace a wellness culture, some of these things on this wheel, versus continuing to do what's in the burnout cycle? And even if it's one thing for one day, it's better than nothing, right? And it's gonna usher in some moments of wellness. I'm all like, even if I can't get a full culture, can I get a moment? Moments of wellness, a wellness moment. How do we even begin to get people to embrace that? Because sometimes when you're stuck in the burnout cycle, you're just stuck. You can't see how to get off. And so someone just helping you take a moment, you're like, oh, this feels good. Let me do this a little more often. And you can begin to do less and less of what you see in the burnout cycle. So we identified 3 things that we feel like are really important in this burnout cycle. And again, self-compassion, extremely important. Boundaries. I can't express. Boundaries can drastically change someone's life. When implemented well, they change your life and the lives of others. And belonging and connection. So one of the things that we're going to talk about now is how do we cultivate community through compassion, particularly self-compassion. And I use this quote on the other side all the time where it says, you know what? You're stuck with yourself for a lifetime. We focus on improving every relationship but the one with ourselves. But you know what? The person you're stuck with is you. So improve that relationship, right? And so compassion is just, what we offer to others. Understanding, kindness. In this profession, we're really good at giving this. Really good. We're going to be compassionate. We're going to realize other people are suffering. We're even going to give people grace for being imperfect. Self-compassion says, am I offering that same grace to myself? Am I saying this is a really difficult moment right now? And it's okay for me to cry and to comfort myself and to care for myself right now. It's okay to acknowledge that. And again, it goes back to the disease of perfectionism. No one said you're supposed to be perfect. It's okay not to be perfect. And self-compassion, one, requires that we remain connected to ourselves and others. So remembering who I am, you ever get to the point that you're like, I'm not even gonna think about me. I just got to get through this list. You've forgotten how to be compassionate because you completely forgot to connect with your body and ask your body what it needs. It also means extending kindness, how you talk to you. Am I talking to myself in a loving way? The other thing that's really important, and I tell everyone, is mindfulness. And the reason mindfulness is important, when working with my clients, I come in and I say, I know when you're not emotionally safe. And they're like, how? I said, look, when you can't be mindful, you're not emotionally safe. Mindfulness means there's no judgment, there's no comparison, and there's no fixed ideas about how things are supposed to go. When you're holding so tightly to how things are supposed to go, you're experiencing a lot of anxiety and depression. When you're comparing yourself or your journey to someone else's, it's a problem, right? And when you're judging yourself or others harshly, you're not in a good space. So judgment, comparison, and fixed ideas. So it's really important that we battle those and we keep people from doing that by telling everybody your journey is yours. Be present. We just want you to be present. So the key components of self-compassion, again, is moderation, a growth versus a fixed mindset, reframing rigid thinking, right? Where people are like, I can only do this. And you're like, wait, you can do this portion or not. And so how do you begin to reframe it? And again, I can't emphasize, what does my best look like today? What does my best look like in this moment? And it is okay. And just knowing I did my best, can that be good enough? So one of the things I want you all to do is we're going to practice a little self-compassion, because I'm not going to talk about it and you not do it. Is I want you all, you recently, let's use this example. You recently had a conversation with a colleague, and this colleague is saying, I'm tired. I can't see how I'm supposed to do this. This is too much. I'm overwhelmed. I'm ready to quit. I don't feel good about myself. No role that I play in my life is working. Parent, mama, teacher, counselor, daughter, none of it's working out right. Everything feels like I'm doing a lot, but nothing well. I'm really struggling. And I don't know how I'm about to start the school year. What would you all say to them in you are statements? And I want you all to put that in the chat. What would you say to them in you are statements? Would you say you are amazing? Would you say you are thoughtful? What would you say to them? I want you all to place that into the chat. What would you say to them? Debbie said, I would say, you are doing the best you can. Heather said, I want everyone to know you are enough. You are stronger and capable of getting through this. Find your internal strength. Lean on those who love you and support you. You are resilient. Yes, Shanisha, you are resilient. You are strong. You got this. You are doing the best you can. You are making a difference. You are showing up. Do you know how many people can't even show up? You are powerful. You can make it through this. Yes, Victoria. You are valid and needed. Yes, you are. So you all would encourage them to help them see what they can't see in the moment. Now, this is what I call extending compassion. So now what I want you all to do is I want you to extend self-compassion. Self-compassion means taking your you are statements and writing I am. So I want you to replace you are with I am. And place those in the chat. I am resilient. Yes, you are. I am showing up. I am enough. I am strong to admit I need help. I am worthy of rest and a break. I am powerful and I am going to make it through this. I got this. Right? I am valid and needed. I am human. I am powerful. Right? I am strong. I am doing the best I can. Right? One of the reasons I want you all to do this is I want you to realize when you say I am, sometimes it's really hard to believe it. And sometimes some people are like, wait, why am I crying? I haven't heard this. I haven't taken this type of compassion in for myself. One of the ways to bring in healing and community is to get people to say I am and to hear you are. You know, one of the things that you can't underestimate is the power of people reading what's on the wall. So as people are walking by, if it just says, I am good enough, I am, and having people repeat them as they're walking, put it up in your space. Give it to students in their space. You know, one of the things when we talk about rituals and routines before starting the day, if you're instructing a class, have your students do some affirmations before, I am going to do my best today. I am smart. I am a scholar. It can really change how people feel, and it can change how you even interact with them. So that's really important. And then again, I'm going to talk about it over and over again. You all are going to be like, Courtney is honing in on this perfectionism. Yes, because it's a disease. And it gets in the way of self-compassion, right? Because you hold your health self, like Debbie said, you hold your health to a standard and you can't extend grace because you got to get to that standard. That is perfectionism. And it's rooted in, if I just worked harder, I would get there. And I'm like, no, that's not true. Sometimes it's just, you just don't have it, and it's okay. Everybody's starting at different places. We're all coming with different resources. And if you can't get there, it's okay. The other thing that's really important and that can really change is boundaries. Brene Brown says the hardest thing about establishing boundaries is that you know you're going to disappoint somebody. And you know why? Because people want what they want from you. And they don't want to stop. I want what's going to make me feel good. I want what I want. But boundaries are really important. And so the thing that I tell everyone, boundaries is really about what kind of integrity do you have with yourself to say, I'm important. Because if you don't have boundaries in your life, it's really hard to know where you begin and another person ends. It's hard to know. I tell anybody where your job begins and your personal life it starts. Everything gets enmeshed. And that's not good because we have multiple pieces of ourselves that need to be full, that needs to be filled up, that needs to be fed, multiple identities. But if we have no boundaries, one thing is going to get it. And it'll most likely is the thing that's the loudest, or the people that are the loudest, right? So the thing that keeps us from doing boundaries is even think about, am I allowed to do it? You know, one of the things working with a student, particularly a young lady, and she was in the room and I could tell there was these gentlemen getting close to her and she didn't know what to do. And I was like, it's okay for you to say you're too close to me, or I'm uncomfortable with you being this close. You know, even I teach that and have taught that to my niece. It's okay for you to acknowledge what you need to feel safe, right? But the fear of being rejected and abandoned, or even the fear of confrontation, sometimes keep people from putting those boundaries in place. And honestly, guilt or shame about needing those boundaries, right? The other thing is just healthy boundaries are not expected or taught. Nobody expects you to have, I tell you, nobody expects you to have good boundaries with your job at all, right? And so it's really important that we model them and that we take them on, you know, and we show people that it's okay for people to say, like, this is my boundary. It's okay, even for kids, to say, you know what, I need this amount of space and I can ask for it. So some examples of boundaries, I'm just throwing this out there, is, you know, one of the things I laugh is like alone time. My mom, my brother and I, we come home. I don't know if y'all had kids. And of course we throw everything on the floor at the door, run in the house, and then automatically, being siblings, we're yelling and screaming at each other. Somebody hasn't done something right and all of that. In the midst of that, my mom would be like, look, I'm going to the bathroom. Unless somebody's dying, don't nobody knock on this door, don't nobody ask me for anything. She took her time, she reclaimed her time. And she told us that we had to exist. That is important. Because what my mom recognized is that if she didn't take that moment in the bathroom, then she would have acted out of being in a struggling mode and probably yelled at me and my brother and did some things that she would have said later, been like, I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to respond to them in that way. And so recognizing that, having that is good. And you know what? And also allowing indulgences, like, maybe one tub of ice cream, not two, right? And then expressing yourself and being able to say, like, it's good. The other thing is, I tell anyone with work, decide how you can have boundaries. On when I'm taking off, I turn the alerts off. Y'all not getting alerts are gone. Or even saying, you know what, if I have to work late 3 days a week, there are 2 days that I'm leaving on time. Right? How can we establish boundaries? The other thing, one of the things that I have been conscious about that I'm trying to do is I'm not going to expect people to respond to an email if I send it after a certain time. Because I want others to be able to practice boundaries. So I'm even going to tell them, I don't want you to respond to this. Starting off, like, we're all going to learn boundaries because they're not model. Don't respond to this. I just need to get this out. Look forward to talking with you in the morning. Right? And the other thing is, on Outlook, like Kim said, on Outlook now you can schedule your emails. So you can type it up and schedule it to go out in the morning. So that's a healthy boundary. So teaching other people that. The other thing I tell anyone right now, consuming too much news is not healthy. Too much screen time, not healthy. It's okay to turn it off. I tell you what, it's okay to say, I'm only doing it for 2 hours a day, and then deciding when those 2 hours are. So I'm not going to put you in groups because I want to get through the presentations, but I would love if you all would share in the chat, what are some boundaries that you all think would be good to implement? And then what are some boundaries? What are 1 to 2 boundaries that we can implement right now? Wendy was like, I need to just take the work emails off my phone. Everybody has an email problem. So Nisha's like, I could just stop checking emails on the weekend. Yes, 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 yes. A friend of mine realized she decided that, they give you perks if you combine your work phone and your home phone. And she's like, your work phone and your personal cell phone. She realized, she's like, you know what? I don't need that perk, because I can actually put this phone in a drawer and walk away, and it helps me create boundaries. Lauren said, take lunch. Yes, take your lunch. When you're on break, I tell anyone, recognize some people, when you take a break, be like, you know what, that's no screen time. No screen, when I take a break, that's no screen time. Debbie said, take a walk during lunch, get moving. You know what, value that time. I think the thing is, decide what are non-negotiables in your day for yourself. And then everything else has to be built around it. And I say that to say, if you've decided I have to go for a walk during lunch, then nothing else gets in the way of that. Those become guardrails in your day. So everything else bump against it, but it doesn't change it. Will says, I gotta tell my family I need help. Yes. Yes, Will, you have to tell them. And one of the things that's really interesting is if you just stop doing it. My mom did this thing with my brother and I, we wouldn't help out with laundry. So she just stopped washing our clothes and washed hers. After a while, we had no clean clothes. We learned to do our own laundry then. She just stopped. So that's something to consider as you think about establishing boundaries. And so the other thing we're going to talk about now is belonging and connection, and understanding how important that is. And so the way we cultivate a sense of belonging is important. And I tell anyone, it's in finding our similarities. So how are we similar? Encouraging people to see, how are we similar? Do we have the same colors? I'm seeing from you all as I'm looking in the chat, I'm like, a lot of you all have the same things. We need to figure out what's going on with email. We need some boundaries with work. We need some boundaries with family. We need to love ourselves more. We give a lot of grace, but we don't take it in. So those are some similarities that I can just see from doing the presentation with you all. The other thing is, how can I honor the differences without demonizing and engaging, right? And saying, you know what, some people are like, I'm good with some of this, right? And how do we do that? And the other thing is, how do we validate? And I tell anyone, the number one thing students say is missing from their life is validation. And validation doesn't mean I agree with you. It just means I heard you and I see you. I think about my niece asked her father, she's like, Daddy, I want to go to this pool party. I'm going. And he's like, it's COVID. And she's like, Daddy, I'm going. I want to go. Everybody's going. I'm going to be the only one not there. So finally her dad said, you know what? I understand it's going to be really hard to not be there and not feel a part of the community. That has to be hard to hold, and you're not going. So validation doesn't have to be an agreement, right? And so the other thing is recognizing and honor it. That you can think about, you know what are the 3 C's of cultivating belonging? It's comfort, connection, and contribution. So if you can feel comfortable, if you can feel connected, but the other thing that people forget in cultivating a sense of belonging is you have to be able to contribute. You have to feel like you're contributing to the environment. And so those are things that cultivate this sense of belonging. The other thing I want to share with you is that it's been determined that lack of social connection is worse for you than obesity, smoking, and high blood pressure. And so if kids or adults are not feeling connected, you're going to have immune systems where people are going to be sick often. Anxiety and depression is going to be high, self-esteem low. And so thinking about how you can connect, I know some of you already said walking, texting others, connecting is important. But the thing that gets in the way of that, and you all have put it in the chat, is people feel like I got to go back to my normal ways of connecting. And I'm like, no, we don't have to do that. We can think of new ways of connecting. And so one of the things in your roles is you might have to help people think about, what are new ways I can connect with others? What are new ways we can connect within the school building? Right? That's different. If we can't have the large assemblies, what are other ways we can connect and feel like a community and a family? The other thing that's really important in connecting is, I said, this idea of offering a therapeutic dose. And I say this to say is that you don't have to be a therapist to offer a therapeutic dose. A therapeutic dose is just something that strengthens my immune system, that makes me feel good about myself, right? And it's a touch point. It's a willingness to understand me. So it's an expression of care, right? So instead of just saying, hey, how you doing? And then walking off, I'm really looking at you and how are you? I'm looking at your face. Are you sure you're okay? It's really engaging and having authentic connection, right? I'm gonna acknowledge your name. And instead of asking where you've been, I'm gonna say, I'm so glad you showed up today. We haven't seen you. It's so good to see you today. It's changing from, I'm thinking about all the things that I haven't seen you, your parents hadn't showed up, this hadn't happened, to say, you know what, I'm just glad you're here. So it's offering a positive interaction with the kid, and that's a therapeutic dose, right? And it's really hard because sometimes the kids that need the most therapeutic doses, they don't give it to us in a loving way. You know, the kid that needs attention, they slam the door, they yell at you in the middle of a Zoom meeting. And so really getting to a place to understand, like, look, we need to offer therapeutic dosing in a way that, you know, anybody can give it, and not just think that because a kid needs a therapeutic dose, they have to go see the counselor or the therapist, because so many are going to be coming with needing a therapeutic dose. It could even just be looking at you and say, I like your smile. You did something different with your hair. So just authentic ways of helping people see. So again, I just want to tell you, we want to acknowledge that people are having a hard time, the stress and the grief. We want to do what we can to cultivate wellness and resilience. And we want to encourage compassion and invite connection and healing. And so we just want you all to think about what your next steps are. I'm going to stop screen sharing and open the floor for questions and comments. And then I'll let you all go for the rest of the day. All right. If there aren't any questions, here's what I want you all to do. There's something, and we call it make the bed. And you ever know, the reason I'm calling it make the bed is because sometimes just having a moment, I don't know about you all, if you're rushing throughout the day, the one thing that doesn't happen is making the bed, right? You run out the house, it's the one thing that doesn't happen. You're like, oh well, we got to get to it today. You don't make the bed. So what I want you all to do, as we talked about in this time, you're going to get about 20 minutes. I don't want you to go do work. I want you to take the next 20 minutes and do something that you forgot to do because you were rushing throughout your day. If it's to make a phone call to somebody, go get coffee, go outside. I want you to make the bed in a figurative sense for the next 20 minutes, because this is a part of the work that we're trying to do as we create community and come together. So everyone, go make your bed, and we will see you all at our next session. Have a great day, everybody.